Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
See, in this lecture we are going to look at the recently announced Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations and how these goals are related to science and technology and how science and technology can be used to realize these goals. Why do we talk of sustainable development today? Because current model of development is unsustainable because it is resource intensive. We use a lot of fossil fuels for generating energy, and for this purpose we have to keep on extracting a lot of resources from nature for energy production, fossil fuels and non-renewable resources of energy, source of energy, and it's unsustainable agriculture because it's based on non-conventional source of energy. For example, chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides and so on, and which are it's becoming more and more expensive. Number one. Number two, they are also doing a lot of harm to human health and environment. So we also have cities, huge cities which are growing at the rapid rate, especially in countries like China and India. These cities everywhere have this problem of pollution of air, water and soil, which is basically affecting which affects human health and environment. Sustainable development is a model of development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is the idea of sustainable development, which has become an important concept now, that we use our resources keeping in mind the fact that the next generation also needs the resources. We do not overuse the resources. The development is always a value loaded concept. It is a goal directed process based on certain values. For example, sustainability itself is a value. Sustainable development is a value, and also and we would like to realize this value by doing certain kinds of actions. The development as a content, that means certain programs, certain schemes, certain ways of doing things, and there must be means to achieve these goals, and generally these means are basically science and technology that we have today, and the kind of new knowledge that we are going to generate, the kind of innovations that we are going to generate by applying the existing scientific knowledge or new knowledge, and institutions like laws, legislation, rules and organizations. So it is basically these are the means to achieve sustainable development, and they are extremely important. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, in 2015 the United Nations declared the Sustainable Development Goals as a continuation of its declaration on Millennium Development Goals. The United Nations recognizes that one should go beyond these Millennium Development Goals and formulated these Sustainable Development Goals. In total, there are 17 goals that have been set by the United Nations. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, otherwise known as global goals, are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect planet and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. That is, it is supposed to be global in its scope, that it is basically to end poverty, protect planet and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. These 17 goals build on successes of the Millennium Development Goals, while including new areas such as climate change, economic inequality, innovation, sustainable consumption, peace and justice, among other priorities. So these are additions to Millennium Development Goals, like climate change, which has become an important issue today. The goals are interconnected. Often the key to success on one will involve tackling issues more commonly associated with the other. In the sense, they are all interconnected goals. For example, elimination of poverty, poverty and inequality are related. And how does one address these interrelated problems? The SDGs work in the spirit of partnership and pragmatism to make right choices now to improve life in a sustainable way for future generations. They provide clear guidelines and targets for all countries to adopt in accordance with their own priorities and environmental challenges of the world at large. The SDGs are an inclusive agenda. They tackle the root causes of poverty and unite us together to make a positive change for both people and planet. Basically, the goals try to target the root causes of poverty and lack of access to resources and so on, and then it is to make a positive change for both people and the planet. That is, the belief is that if on earth there is increasing poverty levels, it is not desirable, number one. It also can lead to social unrest and social kind of upheavals. So that is why we should try to tackle problems like poverty on urgent basis. Globally, more than 800 million people are still living on less than $1.25 a day. Many lacking access to adequate food, clean drinking water and sanitation. Rapid economic growth in countries like China and India has lifted millions of people out of poverty, but progress has been uneven. That is, India and China with huge populations of 1 billion plus were actually, their poverty levels were very high some time back, but because of sustained activities, because of the globalization, liberalization, which created a lot of avenues for employment, today our poverty levels have come down, but still is a problem. Women are more likely to live in poverty than men due to unequal access to paid work, education and property. See, in most of the societies, there is always a discrepancy, there is always a kind of a discrepancy between the level to which women can reach in employment, in professional employment, and the access to education higher levels. We have seen that as women go up in the higher education level, the dropout rate increases, and they also don't have title to properties. They don't own properties. It's always the property of the family. The property of the family in most of the patriarchal societies belong to men, and women are simply seen as dependents. So that's why there's a need for creating institutional mechanisms to see that women also own property. Progress also has been limited to other regions such as South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, which account for 80% of those living in extreme poverty. New threats brought on by climate change, conflict and food insecurity means even more work is needed to bring people out of poverty. So because we are experiencing, even now some of the parts of the world are in extreme poverty like South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the high levels of poverty exist. And for example, there is also a threat of climate change and conflict and food insecurity. See, climate change also can create food insecurity because unpredictable climate, unpredictable weather conditions can really create problems for agriculture. For example, people say that 2% increase in temperature can affect agriculture very drastically. It can affect yields and so on. So this is a problem. How does one address this? The rapid economic growth and increased agriculture productivity over the past 2 decades have seen the number of undernourished people drop by almost half in most of the countries. Many developing countries that used to suffer from famine and hunger can now meet the nutritional needs of most vulnerable. Central and East Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean have all made huge progress in eradicating extreme hunger. So although we address the problem of hunger to some extent, it still remains, one has to be very, very alert to see that hunger levels don't go up because the population is going to increase, because for example in countries like China and India the population base is very large, and even if a couple decides to have 1 or 2 children, the population can be very, very huge in these countries, and many countries where the population increases, growth rate has been very high. These are all huge achievements, of course, minimizing or reducing hunger and so on. Extreme hunger and malnutrition remain a huge barrier to development in many countries. 795 million people are estimated to be chronically undernourished as of 2014, often as a direct consequence of environmental degradation, drought and loss of biodiversity. Over 90 million children under the age of 5 are dangerously underweight, and 1 person in every 4 still goes hungry in Africa. In this sense, see, you may have large increase in agricultural productivity, but there can be malnutrition coexisting with this increase in agricultural productivity. Malnutrition means that one is not getting balanced food, and how does one ensure that individuals, children, women and everybody, old people, everybody gets kind of a balanced food, nutritious food. That is, one may eat a lot of rich food, but it may not be nutritious food. Because of loss of biodiversity also, you can have problems of malnutrition. So I think one has to really address this problem across the world to see that malnutrition disappears from the face of the planet, because malnutrition, addressing questions, addressing the question of malnutrition requires resources like information, resources like what kind of food one should consume, the kind of the balance between carbohydrates, proteins and fats. It's not that if you continue to eat a lot of carbohydrates, you may not have nutritious food at all. So you must add vegetables, you must add, fish, eggs and meat and so on. I think how does one get this food basket which is going to ensure nutrition for all in a family, in a household, men, women, old, young, boys and girls. So gender equality is an important question that that these SDGs address. According to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, it says ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls is not only basic human right, but also crucial to accelerating sustainable development. It has been proven time and again that empowering women and girls has a multiplier effect and helps to drive up economic growth and development across the world. So that's why there is insistence on girl child getting educated, women getting empowered. If a woman is empowered, the entire family is empowered. If a woman is educated, the entire family is educated. That's the kind of situation we have experienced. And high levels of women's education means high levels of literacy in the next generation. So that's the reason why women should have access to education, women should have access to employment, and that will affect the family very directly and in a positive sense. Since 2000, the UNDP, together with United Nations partners and the rest of the global community, has made gender equality central to our work. We have seen remarkable progress since then. More girls are now in schools compared to 15 years ago, and most regions have reached gender parity in primary education. Women now make up about 41% of paid workers outside agriculture compared to 35% in 1990 across the world. So in this context, the SDGs aim to build on these achievements to ensure that there is an end to discrimination against women and girls everywhere. There are still huge inequalities in labour market in some regions, with women systematically denied equal opportunities or equal access to jobs. Sexual violence and exploitation, the unequal division of unpaid care and domestic work, and discrimination in public office all remain huge barriers. We still have to fight the problems of women getting discriminated in office places, sexual harassment in offices, and it is still a problem. And we keep hearing in India, we keep hearing in spite of a Nirbhaya Act, women are sexually harassed, exploited, and this has to be stopped. How does one do this? One must create a lot of awareness among people, a lot of mechanisms to protect women who go to work, women who are employed, and so on. There must be some way of addressing this problem. Affording women equal rights to economic resources such as land and property are vital targets to realizing this goal. So is ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health. Today there are more women in public office than ever before, but encouraging women leaders to help to strengthen the policies and legislation for greater gender equality. So gender equality is something that is a goal of one of the goals of the SDGs, one of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and it's extremely important to see that there is gender equality. There is also all the technologies that are going to be developed are gender neutral, both men and women can use, and women should participate in innovation process, and also they should really, as users of a technology, they should have stakes in what kind of technologies they want, how the technologies have to be designed, keeping in view the women's requirements, and this has to be done. Sometimes some innovative products come into market which women cannot really use without any kind of restrictions. I mean, sometimes they find it difficult to use certain kinds of products. This has to go, and all products that are innovative products must be accessible to women without any difficulties. Energy is an important problem that the whole world is faced with. Between 1990 and 2010, the number of people with access to electricity has increased by 1.7 billion, and as the global population continues to rise, so will the demand for cheap energy. A global economy reliant on fossil fuels and increase of greenhouse gases and their emissions is creating drastic changes to our climate system. This is impacting every continent. That means increasing use of fossil fuel, energy based on fossil fuels, is leading to increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and this in turn causes climate change, and it's going to climate change in turn causes several problems for humanity. Efforts to encourage clean energy has resulted more than 20% of global power being generated by renewable source of energy as of 2011, but still 1 in 5 people lack access to electricity, and as the demand continues to rise, there needs to be a substantial increase in the production of renewable energy across the world. For example, countries like India, the demand for energy has been increasing enormously, and our continuous dependence on fossil fuels is not going to satisfy or is not going to meet our energy demands. So there is need for generating energy from alternate sources like solar energy, and solar energy should be made affordable to all people, and we should think in terms of solar energy being supplied on the grid, and also some kind of gadgets which are standalones based on solar energy also must be developed, which can be used at the level of households. So we have really had certain examples of standalone solar energy based gadgets like solar cookers, and these cookers have some problems with the design. They are quite heavy, they cannot move easily from one place to another, because these solar cookers have to be placed in a location where sunlight is abundant. So another problem with solar energy is how do you store solar energy in rainy seasons and when there is no sunlight? This question also has to be addressed. Of course, we are now using batteries. When the sun is bright, the solar energy charges the batteries. When sun goes out, these batteries take over and provide energy to the appliances that we use. And of course, one has to really see how really the storage can be increased. Ensuring universal access to affordable electricity by 2030 means investing clean energy sources such as solar, wind and thermal. Adopting cost-effective standards for a wider range of technologies could also reduce global electricity consumption by buildings and industry by 14%. See, we also should think in terms of how do we build our houses, how do we build our offices, how do we build our new spaces which consume less electricity, less energy. For example, if you look at all the buildings today, there is a tendency to use a lot of glass material as in the building. The glass, the buildings which use glass material in construction means they consume lot of energy. So we should see how the designs can be developed in such a way that they consume less energy. This means avoiding roughly 130 mid-sized power plants, expanding infrastructure and upgrading technology to provide clean energy. Okay, that means number one, we should design buildings in such a way that they consume less energy. We should switch over to alternate source of energy to really reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Industry, investment in infrastructure and innovation are crucial drivers of economic growth and development in any country. With over half of the world population now living in cities, mass transport and renewable energy are becoming ever more important, as are growth of new industries and information and communication technologies. Now, as we said that there has been a rapid growth in urban population, especially in countries like China and India, which have huge populations, the rural population moving into cities for jobs, because the rural living conditions are not conducive because of drought, because of lack of rainfall, because of various other reasons, because lack of off-farm, non-agricultural employment, people are moving over to cities. How does one address this problem? How does one really see that we create off-farm jobs or non-agricultural employment in rural communities so that they do not migrate to cities to get into a low-paid jobs or jobs with low wages, which cannot really give them a decent life in cities. So technological progress is also key to finding lasting solutions to both economic and environmental challenges, such as providing new jobs and promoting energy efficiency, promoting sustainable industries, and investing in scientific research and innovation are all important ways to facilitate sustainable development. See, sustainable development today has to depend on science and technology, and the science and technology also has to understand the values that we attach to sustainable development. So we should develop technologies, technological solutions which can enhance sustainability. They should really allow sustainable use of resources. The technologies should not lead to overuse of resources. So that's how one should design technologies so that the goal of sustainable development is achieved. See, we have seen that certain technologies are very exploitative. They overexploit resources. For example, fishing by using huge trawlers, they can almost remove entire stock of fish, which is not good for regeneration of fish. So that there must be some control on this kind of technologies which indiscriminately remove the resources without possibility of regeneration. More than 4 billion people still do not have access to the internet. 90% are from the developing world. Bridging this digital divide is crucial to ensure equal access to information and knowledge, as well as foster innovation and entrepreneurship. So today we keep talking about digitization of the economy in countries like India. We keep talking about digitization of the economy. We say that all transactions must be digitized. So this is a problem. People don't have access to the devices which can help them to do digital transactions. They do not have access to, for example, computers. They don't have access to internet. So they cannot really be part of this digital economy. How do you make digital economy more inclusive so that you get in more and more people to have access to these ICTs? So this is a problem. Although we keep talking about this, it's a extremely important problem because we don't have net connectivity into the households in rural areas. Forget about rural areas. In big cities, we don't have household connections. Still, many households do not have internet connectivity. It's a problem. So one has to really understand this. how does one address this question? So, what has to be done in India to achieve these SDGs? We said first of all we should reduce gender inequality, which of course we made some progress, but that is not enough. We should try and provide clean water and sanitation to our communities in both small towns, big towns and cities. We should really encourage small farmers. We should encourage intercropping. We should encourage cultivation of millet crops which will provide food security to people. Food security means availability of adequate quantity and quality of food throughout the year. It is only by increasing the food basket, by increasing the kind of food grains, both rice, wheat and coarse food grains, we are going to increase our food security. We cannot depend on one particular kind of food grain that will make us vulnerable. Energy security must be there in order to see that every household gets energy, every industry gets energy, adequate energy throughout the year, and this has to be a combination of right now energy from fossil fuels plus solar energy and other alternate source of energy. Industry must attempt green innovations. These innovations should not really overexploit our resources. Number one, they should be sustainable, they should be green in the sense they do not create environmental problems like air pollution, water pollution and soil pollution. Institutional innovations, new legislations and laws are required to see that how we incorporate the sustainable goals into our economic policy and development policy at large. Changes in the world, individual values, attitudes and actions are extremely important. Consumerism, we have been driven by consumerism, we want to consume as much as possible. There is a tendency to consume more than what is required. I think we should really put limits on what we consume so that these resources are left to the next generations for their use. I think we should really reduce our greed and we should go by what we require actually to live a decent life without over consuming the resources that we have. In this lecture we are going to look at scientific integrity or research integrity. So, what does one mean by research or scientific integrity, and why is it necessary in doing science? So, basically science as a new system of knowledge emerged in the 16th century. 16th century onwards it has been growing, and people have really have been contributing to understanding of nature, contributing to understanding of the world in different ways. And as by 19th century science has become more a professional activity. Before that science was more an amateur activity where people who had out of their personal interest took interest in investigating natural phenomena and reported to the sometimes published these their findings, and the Royal Society of London, Royal Society of England provided a forum for people to come and exchange their ideas and views, and the Royal Society established its own journal in 1664, the Philosophical Transactions. People used to publish, some of them used to publish in the journal. So, by 19th century science became more a professional kind of activity. It is no longer an amateur activity, and once it becomes professional, then certain codes of conduct become imperative for people to practice science. And in Robert Merton in the United States, who is an American sociologist who pioneered the specialty of sociology of science in the US along with his colleagues, according to him, science is an institution, the goal of which is extension of scientific knowledge after due certification. The certification is done by applying technical criteria like evidence and logic, which are impersonal, and in that sense they are technical. So, as science as an institution, there are some ethos of science which practitioners of science have to internalize. According to Merton, these are universalism, communism, disinterestedness and organized skepticism. He also adds the following values like humility and originality. Conformity and rewards. Robert Merton employs structural functional theory to understand science as an institution. According to this theory, members who participate in the institution are expected to conform to the norms. Conformity would get rewards, and non-conformity or deviance from the norms will attract sanctions or punishments. The rewards are in the form of recognition and awards by the professional societies and governments and other bodies. For example, scientists know that if they make original contributions, they would get recognition in the profession. The forms of recognition varies with the significance of the contribution. For example, Nobel laureate, Nobel Prize is the highest kind of recognition that anybody in science can get, because the contributions for which Nobel Prize is awarded are very, very fundamental contributions which changes the way we look at the phenomena. And there are several other kinds of recognitions. For example, a particular field of research is named after some scientists. For example, Newton's laws of motion, the laws are named after Newton because he was the one who formulated these laws, so on. So governments of different countries give various kinds of awards to scientists who have accomplished in their own profession, and so that's how the recognition becomes very important motivation for scientists to do original research. Scientists compete to get recognition. This competition is not because of self-aggrandizement, egoistic considerations. It is because of the institutional norm of originality. If one makes original contributions, one gets recognition. The attitude of scientists to the institutional norm are as follows. One, some of them conform to the norms and do research and publish, and some of them may get some kind of recognition later on. Some deviate and resort to certain unethical practices, and some are ambivalent. That means they do not know how to sort of respond to these institutional norm. Conformity to the norm of originality yields recognition and rewards, as I said. The recognition depends on the significance of the contribution I just now mentioned. If the contribution is novel and opens up a new field of inquiry, the field may be named after the scientist whose work led to the creation of the specialty. For example, Newton's laws of motion I said just now mentioned. Boyle's law is another kind of recognition that Boyle's got for formulating the law. So what are the deviant kind of a behavior that people resort to get recognition? Some scientists resort to deviant practices or unethical practices to gain recognition by resorting to A, plagiarism, 2, fraud, 3, fudging data. Basically, plagiarism means copying some other person's ideas or data and claiming the ideas and data as one's own. The plagiarist does not acknowledge the source of ideas or data from where he actually borrowed. So this is ethical misconduct, and this does not help in advancement of knowledge in science, because it does not contribute, it is not original knowledge, because it is somebody's ideas which already been publicized. So there are several examples in the history of science, and it continues even now. But it is difficult to do it in today's context, as the plagiarism can be checked with the help of software, Google Scholar, Turnitin, etc. Lot of material is available on the internet. There is a tendency on the part of the young students to copy from these internet sources and do not acknowledge the source from where they got this. So when they write term papers, when they write sometimes their dissertations, and they generally try to do this, and this can be actually caught. Plagiarism does not advance scientific knowledge. It cannot be sort of permitted in professional science. See, scientific culture is supposed to be papyrus-centric culture. Sometime back, Derek Desailly Price in 1962 or 63 wrote a book on little science and big science, where he talked of the cultures of scientists and engineers. He said they are very different. Scientists are papyrus-centric. It means they want to publish as many papers as possible and as early as possible, whereas engineers do not want to publish, and they would like to keep their work secret until they get a product or a process out of the work, and which can be patented. So that is why engineering culture is called papyrophobic, and culture of scientists is called papyrocentric culture. A scientist is papyrocentric, he or she wants to communicate the results of her work as early as possible so that she can preempt others from staking the claim for priority and consequent recognition. The motivation to publish is based on the institutional norm to contribute to original knowledge, that is to contribute to original knowledge for the advancement of science. That is, a scientist is compelled to do research, original research, and publicize this as early as possible so that others do not do this kind of work and get the recognition for the same kind of work. This happens in science because in a given specialty, a group of people working in different places, they might hit upon same kind of problems and also might hit upon same kind of solutions. So this happens, this is called multiple independent discoveries, and in that case there is a race to race between these groups to publicize as early as possible, communicate the results as early as possible. So motivation to publish is based on the institutional norm, that is to contribute to original knowledge for the advancement of science. Publication of their articles, research papers is conforming to the norm of institutional norm of conforming to the norm of originality. The originality can be of at different levels. Originality can be in the form of a small technique which can be used in a particular experiment or particular process, or it can be a fundamental kind of contribution which, for example, changes the whole scenario with respect to a particular field. That is, shift from geocentric theory of universe to heliocentric theory of universe is a fundamental kind of a shift which make us see the world differently, not only differently but different worlds. So deviant behavior, what is deviant behavior in this context? Some scientists resort to deviant means to achieve recognition. They claim their work is original and hence has to be recognized. I said just now mentioned about plagiarism, borrowing others' ideas, and this is unethical and it's misconduct. And I said although it is easier to have access to material on the net today, it is possible to check this kind of plagiarism using software. I said the plagiarism does not contribute to advancement of knowledge. Persons resorting to plagiarism are punished by the organizations such as universities and research laboratories to which they are affiliated. So there were cases of plagiarism in India as well, about which I will mention in a minute. Plagiarism is, I would not say rampant, but it is there and it is possible to check now. So students should be told that it is a misconduct they should not resort to, and they should try to make some original contributions or write their dissertations in their own language. The other is fudging data. Experimental data or data collected from field work is fudged to show that the data supports one's hypothesis or a theory. So basically scientific knowledge grows not by protecting one's theories or hypothesis, but by rejecting or refuting your hypothesis so that a new hypothesis is formulated. But some people resort to this kind of protecting one's own hypothesis by fudging data. This is an instance of unethical practice. Practicing scientists in the field can find out if unreasonable claims are made on the basis of the data. There is also called scientific hoax. Hoax is basically trying to say deliberately creating evidence in support of one's claim. So there are examples in history of science. The one example I would like to give is Piltdown hoax. In 1912, Charles Dawson claimed that he discovered the missing link between ape and man at a place called Piltdown near Sussex, England. The evidence which he showed was a section of a human-like skull which he found at a place called Piltdown near Sussex, which he claimed he found the place called Piltdown near Sussex. He also claimed that he found some artifacts at the place, at the site, indicating that the artifacts were used by the so-called human beings at that site. This generated a debate as such remains are not associated with that place or site. In 1953, it was proved to be a hoax. The skull remains that were shown as belonging to a small sized modern human being fitted with the teeth of an orangutan. So, it is basically what he did was he fudged data. That is, he fitted the teeth of orangutan to a human jaw, which was part of the skull, and showed it as the evidence of the this particular link between ape and human beings. So, that means this site was never shown to be the site where such ancestors lived, and this was exposed as a hoax. There is one more example I would like to give, is from India. This is called Himalayan hoax. This is more serious than Piltdown hoax, as it influenced the entire Himalayan geology, construction of Himalayan geology. In the case of Piltdown man, it is only one specimen that he showed as evidence, but here in this case there are several reports written on the basis of the presence of the alleged presence of certain tiny invertebrates in Himalayan region, which really became part of the scientific literature. Several papers were published. This person, Viswajit Gupta, a paleontologist, claimed that he found some fossils in Himalayan region, that he discovered fossils of tiny invertebrates and published several papers on the fossils in Himalayas. John A. Tallant, an Australian paleontologist, in 1989 accused Viswajit Gupta of fraud, as the fossils that Gupta showed were brought over from a place near New York and also from a place near Morocco, a place in Morocco. John A. Tallant says that Viswajit Gupta's publications have become part of scientific literature, and it is difficult to excise or remove Gupta's fraudulent contributions from the literature. That is, the damage that he has done to the scientific literature is extensive, and this was exposed. However, Viswajit Gupta said this John A. Tallant has some personal kind of animosity against him, and so he is making these charges. However, later on people found that the kind of invertebrate fossils that the Viswajit Gupta showed were not, we may call, endemic to this parts of the Himalayan region. They occur elsewhere, not in Himalayan region. So, that means you try to create a deliberate evidence to make some claims and thus gain recognition from the community of scientists. So, this kind of activities keep going on, and they try to use shortcuts to become famous, to get recognition, which ultimately will be exposed later on. There are several cases. Sometime back in Pune University, one of the students wrote a research paper in collaboration with her supervisor, and which later on was found to be a copied material from an article which appeared much earlier in a journal. So, things like this keep happening. Then these things get detected. All modern countries, especially all scientific institutions, have a notion of what is scientific integrity, and scientific integrity means, according to the Environmental Protection Agency of US, scientific integrity results from adherence to professional values, practices when conducting and applying the results of science scholarship. It ensures objectivity, clarity, reproducibility and utility. So, whenever a scientist makes a claim about certain phenomena, that claim should be objective, it must be clearly stated, and it also must be reproducible. If somebody says, I conducted this experiment and got the results, the experiment must be reproducible. But most of the time it is very difficult to reproduce experiments, that is what the literature says. And then it also should have utility. Of course, each kind of a country will have certain definition of this scientific integrity. So, the EPA of USA, this agency according to this agency, scientific integrity is important because it provides insulation from bias, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, outside interference, censorship, inadequate procedural and information security. That means if one maintains integrity in doing research, one can avoid bias and one can avoid fabrication of data, as I just mentioned, fraud, hoax and so on. And also one can avoid plagiarism and avoid outside interference and so on. In India also we have professional organizations and societies which play a role in regulating the conduct of members through various ways. For example, in our country we have 3 academies: the International Science Academy based in Delhi, the National Academy of Sciences Allahabad and Indian Academy of Sciences based in Bengaluru. The enrollment to the membership of the academies is based on nominations. The nominations are based on the quality of work done by the person being nominated. So these academies keep on giving statements, releasing statements regarding how to evaluate research, how to sort of award, how to give awards, what kind of basis one should use, how to give membership, the notion of objectivity, how do you evaluate the contributions made by a person so that he or she can be nominated to the academy. So all this involves some kind of integrity. While evaluating the claims of somebody, the evaluator must have the integrity. He cannot or she cannot overrate the contributions of an individual or underrate the contributions of an individual. So I think this is extremely important for the growth of science, for the advancement of knowledge in every country, and one should really uphold the integrity, principle of integrity, and see that one makes original contributions to the advancement of knowledge. So before I go on to further, I would like to mention the third kind of response of the scientists. I said it is ambivalence. They do not know how to respond to the norm of originality. At least one case you can find in history of science, where, for example, the organic theory of evolution was proposed by Charles Darwin in the 19th century, 1859 or so. Before that, Charles Wallace also proposed a similar kind of a theory, organic evolution, based on his work. When it came to recognizing who did it first, Charles Wallace withdrew his claim and said the credit should go to Darwin, Charles Darwin, because he had accumulated a lot of empirical evidence in support of organic theory of evolution, and he said recognition should go to him. Wallace also did extremely important work in this area. So that is one kind of response to this. See, there are some theories of ethics one should really recall at this stage. Theory of universal ethics, philosopher who said according to Kant's theory of ethics, the rightness or wrongness of actions is related to the notion of our duty rather than to their consequences, whether or not our actions fulfill expectations of our duty. This is also called deontological moral theory. In the sense, there is a universal theory of ethics, and we should evaluate our actions in terms of whether our action fulfills the duty which we are supposed to carry out. And second theory is the consequentialist theory of ethics. It posits or argues that the basis of judgment about rightness or wrongness of an action is based on the evaluation of the consequences of human conduct for others. That is, consequentialist theory says judgment to decide whether a particular act is wrong or right is based on the evaluation of the consequences that the action has for others. Now let me give you some examples of the consequentialist theory. For example, one can always talk in terms of universal ethics, universal deontological moral principles. There are certain things, for example, everybody is entitled to dignity of life, everybody is entitled to right to life. This of course is a universal kind of a moral principle. Nobody should harm others, nobody should kill others, no matter in which society one lives. This is what called inalienable right to life. So this nobody can challenge, nobody can question, nobody can really meddle with. There are other kinds of situations where we think of consequences of what we do for others. See, I gave in the course of our lectures, we saw several situations in which the consequences of loss of biodiversity will be enormous for the communities. The consequences of introducing genetically modified food in the society, what it will do to consumers, what it will do to men, women and so on, children. So I think these consequences have to be really evaluated before deciding on introducing certain new interventions in the society. This is where we should really look at evaluate the consequences. See, for example, what happens if you use genetically modified cotton seed for the environment? That's the question. If you really anticipate what can happen to environment, perhaps one should take a decision on not introducing such seeds as genetically modified seed. For example, one has to evaluate the consequences before we actually decide as to what we should do. The industrial science and ethics, the scientific integrity is important in the case of industrial science as products are going to be consumed or used by human beings. For example, drugs, the pharmaceutical industry should be far more ethical in their practices, what kind of drugs they make, whether they are safe for consumption, whether they create any undesirable side effects and so on. So what are the consequences of consumers of consuming or using a particular product? Are the consequences pose a threat to safety of human life and health? What are the consequences for environment? What are the consequences of people getting exposed to radiation from a nuclear plant? I think these are the questions one should raise before we resort to any kind of interventions. Thank you very much.